Everyone knows Bruce Lee as the man who could not be broken, the fastest hands in film history, the philosopher warrior who turned his body into a weapon and his mind into a legend. But there's a version of this story most documentaries skip, a quieter, harder truth. The same discipline that made Bruce Lee a legend was also, slowly and silently, wearing his body down, long before the world ever found out. This isn't a highlight reel. This is what obsession costs when nobody's watching. We love stories about relentless discipline. Wake up early. Train harder than everyone else. Never accept good enough. Bruce Lee is often held up as the ultimate proof that this kind of intensity works. But somewhere between the inspirational quotes and the training montages, an uncomfortable question gets buried. What does it actually cost a human body and mind to live at that level every single day for years without ever easing off? Bruce Lee's life gives us a real answer. Not a motivational poster answer, a human one. By the late 1960s, Bruce Lee had built a reputation in the United States as one of the most technically gifted martial artists alive. He was teaching, developing his own system, jeet, and pushing to break into an American film industry that wasn't sure what to do with an Asian leading man. To compensate for an industry that underestimated him, Lee leaned even harder into the one thing he could fully control, his own physical conditioning. Those close to him described a training routine that went far beyond what most professional athletes attempted. Multiple sessions a day, obsessive attention to diet and body composition, and a mindset that treated rest as something to be minimized rather than respected. This wasn't training as a hobby. It was training as identity. For Bruce Lee, being anything less than the most physically prepared person in any room wasn't acceptable, and that standard didn't have an off switch. In May 1973, months before his death, Bruce Lee collapsed during a dubbing session in Hong Kong and experienced a seizure, later diagnosed as cerebral edema, swelling of the brain. Doctors at the time treated the acute episode and he recovered, but the incident alarmed people around him. It was a clear signal that something in his body was under serious strain. He continued working at his usual intense pace in the months that followed. On July 20th, 1973, Bruce Lee died in Hong Kong at the age of 32. The official cause of death was later attributed to a reaction involving cerebral edema, with the medical explanation at the time linking it to a reaction to a compound in a medication he had taken for a headache. Even decades later, researchers and biographers have continued to revisit the case, and some retrospective analyses have raised questions about the broader toll of extreme training, dietary practices, and heat exposure on his body in the years leading up to his death. The conflict here isn't a rival fighter or a villain. It's Bruce Lee against his own body, a battle where his greatest strength, unrelenting discipline, may also have been quietly working against him. Most people don't know that Bruce Lee experimented with cutting his own body fat to extremely low levels, a practice that put real strain on his physical systems in pursuit of an on-screen physique that looked superhuman. Most people also don't know about the May 1973 collapse at all. It's frequently left out of highlight-driven retellings of his life, even though it was a direct warning sign months before his death. And few people realize that Bruce Lee was famous even among close friends for training through minor injuries and illness, treating almost any discomfort as something to push past rather than something to listen to. Why would someone this disciplined ignore such clear warning signs? This pattern isn't unique to Bruce Lee. Psychologists who study elite performers describe a phenomenon sometimes called identity fusion, when a person's sense of self becomes so completely tied to their achievement in one domain that any signal of weakness feels like an attack on their identity itself, not just their body. For someone in that mental state, rest doesn't feel like recovery. It feels like losing ground. Pain doesn't feel like information. It feels like an obstacle to override. That's a powerful engine for greatness, and, left unchecked, a genuinely dangerous one. Bruce Lee's public philosophy was about adaptability, being like water, flexible and unattached to rigid form. But privately, in his training habits, there's a striking irony. The man who preached flexibility may have applied almost none of it to himself. This pattern shows up again and again in high obsession achievers across eras. Elite athletes and founders alike have described similar dynamics. Pushing through injury, treating rest as weakness, defining themselves so completely through output that stopping starts to feel unbearable. The details differ from person to person, but the shape of the psychological trap is nearly identical. The trait that builds the legend is often the same trait that, left unmanaged, can start to break the person underneath it. What can we actually take from this, without dismissing everything Bruce Lee built? First, discipline needs a governor. The habits that make you exceptional, intensity, consistency, refusal to quit, need a counterbalance, or they become indistinguishable from self-neglect. Second, warning signs deserve respect, not override. A collapse, a persistent symptom, an injury that won't heal, these aren't tests of willpower. They're information. Treating them as obstacles to push through, rather than signals to investigate, is where discipline quietly turns into danger. Third, identity built entirely on output is fragile. When your sense of self depends completely on relentless performance, any signal to slow down feels like a threat to who you are, which is exactly why so many high performers ignore it until it's too late. Bruce Lee gave the world an extraordinary standard of discipline, one that still shapes how people train, think, and push themselves 50 years later. That part of the legacy is real, and it's earned. But the full story includes the part that's harder to sit with, a body that gave clear warnings, and a mindset that had been trained for years to override warnings rather than listen to them. Maybe the most honest tribute to Bruce Lee isn't just chasing his level of discipline. It's asking the question he may never have let himself ask. At what point does refusing to stop being strength and start being something else entirely? If this changed how you think about discipline, subscribe. We're breaking down the real, complicated truth behind the icons everyone thinks they already know. Comment below. Do you push through warning signs in your own life? Or do you know when to stop? And tell us what we should dissect next.